Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar, How to Create Better Creative Campaigns with Data-Driven Insights. Today we'll be discussing the effective use of research to aid the creative process, with particular focus on the evolving model of creative testing, the execution of testing, and post-campaign analysis research as well. We'll be using real-world examples of situations where things have worked well and where it hasn't, but mainly focusing on how research and data is there to help creativity and not to hinder it. So just to quickly introduce ourselves, my name is Hannah. I am the Marketing and Client Onboarding Manager here at Rare Group. We are a market research and tech consultancy helping our clients understand their customers better through data and technology. And we're joined by Mindfield Advertising, who are experts in creating groundbreaking creative campaigns that get you noticed. So your speakers today are Jimmy Docherty, who is creative strategist from Mindfield Advertising, who has over 20 years experience working with creative agencies and media owners, and Keith Crane, our research director here at Rare Group, who has over 15 years experience in research and data. So just before I hand you over to them, what you can expect to gain from this webinar is an understanding of the creative process, looking at the traditional and new methods, best practices in creative research and how this can shape your creative output, as well as looking at the dangers in getting it wrong and what gets in the way and how to overcome those obstacles. So I'll now hand you over to Jimmy and Keith, who will take you a bit more through the webinar in more detail.
Thanks very much, Hannah. And morning, everyone. Morning, Jimmy. Hope you're all right. Good to see you again.
Morning.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Obviously, Hannah's gone through the agenda of what we're looking to cover today. There is an hour in the diary for this. However, realistically, you can expect the webinar to take around 30 minutes, and then we'll have some time for a Q&A at the end, whether you've got any questions for myself or Jimmy, or a combination of both if required. So I think, firstly, a great place to start with this is actually looking at the creative strategy in the first place. Now, so, you know, we're going to look at how to formulate creative strategy. And of course, there are a number of different ways to do this, depending on your school of thought, your experiences in the background. But in this session, we're going to be focusing on something called the single-minded proposition for your campaign, which is a great way of looking at the best practice in creative strategy. So, creative without strategy is art. Creativity with strategy is advertising. And that's an interesting quote that was once made by Professor Jeff Richards, and one which very much sets the tone. The job of a great creative is, of course, still very much to both be great and be creative. But without strategic direction and understanding, how are we supposed to know how it's going to be received? So this is where the single-minded proposition comes into play, and it's something that sets the bar for gold standard in your campaigns. So, Jimmy, I'll pass over to you on the next slide to talk through the key steps in formulating a great creative strategy, including creating that all-encompassing single-minded proposition.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, the key steps in formulating the right creative strategy is, if you're involved in any kind of brand or advertising marketing work, this is me teaching you how to suck eggs here. So I'll be as quick as I can at this point, and we can move straight on to the single-minded proposition. But the first thing, when it comes to creating the strategy, this is basically how we're going to play and how we're going to win. That's all that creative strategy is about. The first element of it is defining the problem that's preventing us from achieving the aims, and that can be the client or the consumer problem that's helping us do that. The second point is just the creative course of action that we want to resolve. So it's going to make it easy for us to do that. Again, that's impact communication, persuasion, which will lead to results. And then the last part is about simplicity. It's about making sure that what we come up with is going to be something that's going to be easily digestible and memorable. And the biggest key part in that final part of the strategy is the single-minded proposition. And if you move the slide on, Keith. the the single-minded proposition. Great creative is always born out of sacrifice. I've worked for over 20 years as a writer in advertising, and this isn't sacrifice on the part of your long-suffering creative who will pull midnight shifts just to try and make something and strain every creative sinew trying to get something that's absolutely perfect for you. This is more about the sacrifice when it comes to actually distilling down all of the great things that we want to say, all of the great things we want to say from brand perspective, from product perspective, from service perspective, and distilling all of this stuff down into one bite-sized nugget. And it's the one thing that's going to drive an emotional connection with your campaign. The best way to describe, also people quite often get mistaken for thinking that a single-minded proposition is kind of like a tagline. It's not really a tagline. You have to think of it like a bloodline. You have to think of it like, quite often, your single-minded proposition is not even spoken in your communications, but it's your DNA that flows through all of your communications. And that's your inward communications and your outward communications as well. You have to treat it like your DNA. It also then becomes part of your evaluation process of the creative, because every piece of creative that you're evaluating, then whether it's display, whether it's radio, whether it's television, whatever it is that forms part of that campaign, it gives you a nice base layer, a foundation that you can look at and say, is this true to the single-minded proposition that we're working to for this campaign? And it's easier at that point in time now to say, yes, this is what we distilled down, and you say, this is our one emotional connection piece of information that we want to get across in this campaign, and this creative sits comfortably with that and delivers this single-minded proposition. Or no, we have to rejig and tweak. It's the old analogy. It's about throwing 10 tennis balls at someone and expecting them to catch them, or just throw one at them. If you throw one at them, 9 out of 10 people will catch it, and you're just trying to get that one tennis ball.
Yeah, cool. I like that analogy. I don't really fancy getting 10 tennis balls thrown at me right enough, but yeah. So cheers, Jimmy. So I think ultimately the thing we've got to say here is that as we know, the creative process is as old as advertising itself, and it can be traced back hundreds, if not thousands, of years. But of course, modern advertising became a major force in the 19th and 20th centuries. And creativity is an art form, make no bones about it. However, in the last few decades, we've begun to understand that it works best when some scientific rigor is added to the process. So while creativity isn't an exact science, it has attributes which are science-like. So it's got specific elements which you can define, like an idea, for example. And there are finite and repeatable steps in the process, much like the rules of a brainstorm. I think the difference and the fun lies in the fact that creativity doesn't create necessarily a singular answer, but can potentially create millions or billions of answers. And obviously don't say that they'll all be good answers, but we're obviously going to address the value of bad ideas in a moment. But because creativity doesn't fit the true qualities of an exact science, it's more commonly, of course, referred to as an art, which means having an innate knowledge, and one that's not learnt. It's something you're born with, more commonly known as talent, of course. But for those who are or are known as being creative, coming up with lots of ideas is as natural as breathing to them. Never been a strong point of mine, but you can see where that comes through. As anyone who's ever watched, I don't know, something like Mad Men, for example, will attest to, creatives of the day had the power to win business, to hold accounts, and be the gatekeeper of business success or failure, based purely on the idea that was generated from their mind or from their pen, and therefore had wielded a lot of power. And in those days, the creative process was based entirely on that creative excellence of the person in the room, which meant that one creative's groundbreaking was potentially another creative's faux pas if it wasn't executed properly. And this meant that the best creatives were in a select few globally recognized agencies, and only the biggest and wealthiest clients could truly excel. So if you think of something like, you know, the Fairy Liquid campaign, for example, we all know of the 60s and 70s, we all know the theme tune, we all know the tagline that goes with it, and that creative has indeed outlived the campaign itself and indeed the person that created it in the first place. But smaller businesses or those that weren't on agency rosters ended up with ads that simply couldn't compete. And at that point, it was down to the creative skills as opposed to the budget, which of course can be more relevant today with the advent of technology and availability of that. However, having a big budget doesn't always necessarily mean you can score the brief perfectly. I'm just going to show you an advert very briefly that I'd like you to have a watch of, and then we'll come back to it in just a wee second.
Hey, morning. I finished early, so I thought I'd pop back and make you breakfast. Pepper on top, right? Oh, hi, you'll need a shantuan. You look great. Probably be a bit busy for the next few weeks. But I'll make it up to you soon, I promise.
So not sure the single-minded proposition was quite on the mark there, but you know, as you can see, even in the 21st century, some people still fail to get the creative process right, even when they've got mega budgets. Now, I can only imagine what Centrum paid Tom Hiddleston to do this, and this advert went live in 13 different markets. Obviously, it was aimed at the Middle East and Asia, and this is I believe the South Korean version of that advert. But ultimately, in this ad, the supposition is that the partner should take a daily supplement to keep the other partner happy. You know, he's a busy man, he's got lots going on, he's made an effort for you. The least you can do is make the effort in return by taking a supplement pill, you know. So I mean, what in my view, what a disaster of an idea, right? So this clearly hasn't had any input from a customer or data and research perspective, and the end result is pretty disastrous, with the ad being pulled not long after it aired. I'm sure Tom Hiddleston spent a long period of time trying to erase all notice of this on YouTube, but it's still there for all to see. Jimmy, what do you think of that one?
Well, whenever I watch ads, I always try and like that second guess the briefing process, and it's difficult. You know, it's always a difficult thing to try and judge someone else's work, and because you don't know what they've gone through in the background in terms of getting something cleared and many stakeholder approvals and all these other things as well. But just creatively, you look at it and you think it's just creepy. It's just. If it was a domestic abuse campaign about spotting controlling behaviour by your partner, you know, it would have been fantastic. But you know, I think the only thing that was missing, you know, Tom Hiddleston's first line, you know, hey, I just finished work out, I thought I'd pop in and make you breakfast, and if you don't scream, I won't hurt you. I think that's the only thing that was missing from the script for that. And the other thing that really, when I watched it the second time, and I couldn't figure out, what does he do for a living? Because it's breakfast time. He's finished work early. He's come off a night shift. He's wearing a suit. But before she's finished breakfast, he's put his suit jacket back on and he's saying, I won't be around for the next 3 weeks. There's so many unanswered questions for me. But I don't think it was focus group. Or if it was, you know, I don't know what the selection criteria was for it, but you know, how many middle-aged misogynistic men can we get in one room and ask them if they see anything wrong with it. But yeah, it wasn't great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think strangest thing for me in the whole thing, as well, as who wants a hot egg with pepper on top of a cold vegetable mix for breakfast, right? Maybe it's just the Scotsman in me, I don't know. But anyway, cheers. So, I mean, now we've obviously, gone through some examples of maybe, what works and what doesn't work, and the single-minded proposition itself. Some ways how it's used to work and can result in some pretty bad examples. I think we'll have a look now at how the creative process should work in theory. So, in 2021, any and every brand has the opportunity to stand out, to be heard, to be different, and to offer something unique that can't be matched or imitated. And it doesn't need to cost the earth. Creative strategists of today have built massively successful campaigns for very little budget, and that's based entirely on the understanding of both the single-minded proposition and having an innate understanding of what makes your audience tick. So, as a brand or service, what's your organization's best source of intelligence? It's pretty obviously your customers, and or your prospects. You've got them on tap and they're ready to tell you what they think. So as a crazy idea, perhaps, why not ask them what they think as a starting point? By doing this, you can understand how your brand or service would resonate with those audiences, and what levers that we need to pull to further engagement and sentiment. And in the case of your own customers, that's before you've even spent a penny. So this isn't about reinventing the wheel or winning awards like the D&D pencils or anything like that for great creative. It's about making small gains, as we've said earlier. It's truly startling how just a few percentage points of a marginal gain on things like ad recall, propensity to purchase, sentiment, and so on can have an enormous impact on the success of your business. And by testing creative in the right way, we then get a handle on what kind of improvement you could look to make. So, in terms of looking at a good case study, I think a good example of this, where data-driven insight, which is then developed into fully fledged creative, is a great example here. Is Three's award-winning holiday spam campaign. It's a few years old now, but it's a great example that I like to refer to. And this campaign promoted the company's offering that allowed customers to use their phones abroad at no extra cost. And the campaign featured a series of 60-second TV ads showing travellers sending cliched holiday photos to friends and family members back home. So, this was inspired by genuine insights into people's behaviour whilst on holiday, and the campaign hinged on the knowledge that we love to brag. So, have a look at this and see what you think.
Hello. I'd like to take this moment to sincerely apologise on behalf of Three. Our customers' recent actions overseas rest entirely on our shoulders. We're sorry. We thought allowing customers to use their phones in 16 destinations worldwide like they would at home was a good thing. No extra cost for calling and texting back home, no extra cost for data. But we failed to consider the consequences. The holiday spam. We're sorry. Sorry for all the sunsets, the fancy cocktails, for plane wing after plane wing after plane wing. Sorry for the mini monuments, the beach feet, the street food, the hashtag no filters, the hot dog legs. We deeply regret the frustration this has caused, and we urge all Three customers, when abroad, please brag responsibly. Thank you.
So I had a quick look on my phone last night when I was preparing for this, and I had 23 different pictures of plane wings in my in my camera rolls, but no hot dog legs. I don't think anyone needs to see them, of course. But as I said, that this was inspired by genuine insight into people's behaviour whilst on holiday, and it did hinge on the knowledge that we love to brag. So, tracking the mobile data usage of a group of customers abroad, Three found that they used 71 times the amount of data they would have used had they been charged as normal back home, and most of which was used to post holiday snaps onto social media. The creative tapped into that finding, warning the UK viewers, as you saw there, that they had to expect an onslaught of holiday spam photos thanks to the new offer that was on play. So, That was another prime example of marketing that works driven by insight. And this campaign successfully tapped into their audience's behaviours and perceptions around the quantity of cliched holiday snaps being shared on social media daily. So using that insight to drive awareness of their unique proposition and appeal to the emotions of their target customers, the campaign actually led to a 90% increase in Three's social conversation volume, higher brand metrics, and customers saving a collective £2.7 billion on roaming charges that year. So really big, really big hitting metrics from across the board there. But now, we have said previously in this webinar that great creative was previously the domain of businesses with enormous budgets and huge teams behind them. And that's certainly the case with an organisation such as Three, of course. But in a second, Jimmy will take you through a recent case study with one of the brands that he's worked with over at Mindfield Advertising there. And although this brand is national in its footprint, it has to play with a much more realistic set of budgets when it comes to creative branding and advertising. What about you, Jimmy?
Yeah, ACO is a smoke alarm and carbon monoxide detector manufacturer. So they're a very big player in the B2B market, and they have something in the region of 96 to 97% of all social housing. They are the suppliers to almost 100% of the UK social housing market. But one of the big issues with safety and smoke detectors and carbon monoxide manufacturers and stuff is that most people don't have the names of these manufacturers. There is no real standout brand name, despite the fact that everyone has them at home. Most people can't recall the name of the smoke detectors that are fitted on their ceilings, or the brands, or anything else that are around it. So one of the things that we always start with any campaign, we were talking about it earlier about single-minded propositions, we always try and figure out what is the emotional connection that we want to forge at the end of this, from the listener, from the viewer, from the user, from the reader. What's the emotional connection at the end of the ad that we want them to take away with them? And that started to factor into our thinking as well with some of the creative and what we were trying to achieve, because once you can create that emotional connection, everybody knows then you have grabbed the attention, you get better product recall, but then it improves the front of mind consideration, and it helps drive sales or user growth, whatever you're trying to achieve with your campaign. With this one, this was the first campaign that ACO were going to take into the consumer market, and this was going to be driving people into Wix DIY, into B&Q, into some of the bigger retailers to pick up something from a shelf, and we wanted them to pick up ACO. So one of the things and the first thoughts that we had there was that we wanted to have the parents, the homeowners, anyone who was going to be buying this product, that if you were picking up a product that was slightly cheaper or didn't have the name ACO on it, there had to be a pang of guilt, because ACO is the market leader when it comes to the protection of homes in the UK. So we wanted that pang of guilt. And the reason I'm using this case study is it's the campaign is still active just now. I know there's still some sites in the London Underground that it's running and different things. But we A/B tested the creative. We did the top side, you can see doing just enough is not enough. This was the message that we're trying to get across. But the reason I've selected this one to look at is because the feedback that we got on the creative testing actually made us change the direction that we're heading in. We brought the creative testing in early enough in the process that we were able to pivot away from something based on a nugget of feedback that came from one of the groups that everyone agreed with. The minute this person mentioned it, everyone said, yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking, but not saying. And that little nugget was one of the mums that was part of the testing group said, as a mum, as a working mum, as a parent, I feel guilty enough that I don't spend enough time with my kids, that I'm not getting to spend quality time with this, that I'm not seeing this person enough, that I'm not keeping up with my friends, that I'm not this, blah, blah, blah. I have enough guilt in my life. I don't need to see more guilt because I'm not paying attention to who's fitted a smoke alarm in the house. And that little bit of information straight away, we thought, yeah, okay, we can still go down the same progression route in terms of the creative and the thinking behind it, but the message we have to in some way soften a little bit. So the idea behind the TV commercial was that we would take it right back to the point of purchase, right back to the point where someone's picking something off the shelf. And this is when we want to be in their heads. We want to take it right back to that point. So we softened the copy around it to safety first, eco first. We kept the message really, really simple. We softened some of the imagery as well. There was a train of thought saying that some of the imagery should have been lifestyle. We A/B tested lifestyle imagery. We A/B tested some of the graphic one. We found that the safe landing zone was somewhere in between. People were saying because smoke alarm, some people were looking at the white discus and saying, oh, didn't really get that immediately. We need to be more obvious, hence the reason we showed the smoke alarms in situ. And then we had very, very short, simple copy messages that just went out: eat, sleep, safe, repeat. We had sites that were next to fire stations, 48 sheet sites. And when the fire engines were leaving, we were driving past eco 48 sheets that said first responder. So it was shots of these products at home that were basically telling people, these are your first responders. This is the safety message we were getting across. So this, when we refocused it again, it landed very, very well. People were saying, yeah, it makes it instantly understandable. And we actually asked the mum again, who had made the first original comment that everyone agreed with, and she said, yes, that makes it much easier for me now, more palatable now. So that is an example of bringing the research early into the creative process actually meant that as much as doing just enough is not enough was a strong message. We wanted people to think, yeah, just picking up any smoke alarm isn't enough. You need to make sure you're making the right choices. We then softened that and just it helped us condense our thinking on it. So it was all round. It was a great way for us to pivot away from where we were heading.
Brilliant, and I think it's a really good example of how you can make marginal gains on this creative, because fundamentally the thread of the message that you're trying to put across to customers hasn't really changed that much. It's the execution of it that's changed and become much thing. Because what better way than to have a campaign that's not as successful as you'd like it to be by making a parent feel really guilty. So even if they are then going to buy your product, they'll feel forced into it and they don't have much in the way of brand sentiment to go with it. So yeah, good examples of how that small kind of testing difference has had a really fundamental impact on the success of the campaign. So good to see that. So thanks, Jimmy. Obviously, it's all good, right? Sounds on the face of it, sounds really simple. And in many ways it totally is. But even today, there are thousands of brands and hundreds of agencies out there that continue to make costly errors simply because they've missed or ignored, in some cases, a step in the process, and that's creative testing. Now, we'll all remember this first one that appeared for a weight loss treatment or weight loss supplement, on the London Underground in 2015, featuring an airbrushed model and a message that really is, in current times, truly a mile off the mark. So the ad received hundreds of complaints and was hugely damaging for their brand. But that said, whilst it was a bad faux pas, it was nowhere near as disastrous as this one from Nivea in 2017. Now, whilst this advert in particular was never aired in the UK, this was aimed at the Middle Eastern and Far Eastern markets. It soon travelled far and wide globally thanks to social media. Now, this ad was aimed at audiences in the Middle and Far East, as I said, and was quickly condemned for its racist undertones and had the caption to go alongside it of "keep it clean, keep it bright, don't let anything ruin it," alongside it. And it went live, that advert, to 19 million people, and it was pulled within 36 hours of it going live. So it just goes to show you that budgets really, in the grand scheme of things, are irrelevant these days when it comes to good creative execution. certainly potentially for production value and things like that, it's important. But in terms of getting the idea and the messaging across, it's kind of irrelevant to an extent. You know, at that point in time, off the back of that campaign, a spokesperson for Nivea said, after realizing that the post is misleading, it was immediately withdrawn. Diversity and equal opportunity are crucial values of Nivea, and the brand represents diversity, tolerance, and equal opportunity. We value difference. Direct or indirect discrimination must be ruled out in all decisions by and in all areas of our activities. So, I mean, you can imagine if you had, you know, any of you guys that are marketers or creatives or business owners or whatever on the webinar, if you had to come into work one day to deal with something like this that had been put out by your own teams, I mean, what do you think the fallout would be to that? And you got to ask yourself, how many pairs of eyes saw this before it went anywhere? And I think, you know, obviously the good news is that this really should never happen if you take the right approach or you're conscientious in your way of doing it. But it also shows you the importance of having you know, in-market cultural sensitivity and knowledge, and that can be gained through creative testing, can be gained through traditional market research, rather than necessarily a regional team making an error such as this that can be seen far and wide. But Jimmy, these can't have been missed by so many people in those marketing and creative departments. I mean, surely. I mean, what do you think in terms of these two? What's your opinions on them?
If we had to view them both through the lens of that, if we get a reaction, that's a good tick in the box. If we get a reaction, I can totally buy and understand that the weight loss collection, Protein World ad, it's a smaller company, London Underground campaign. It probably didn't go through, as you say, so many sets of eyes to get into position and get placed. The White is Purity campaign, once we realised that it was misleading, it wasn't misleading. It was pretty much only one way that you can take that campaign. I think that was born out of, let's see if we can get a reaction. And we'll treat it less as a marketing campaign, more as a PR reactionary campaign. And I think it backfired on them, because, as you say, you don't go live in so many markets with that without someone flagging on the racist undertones radar that this is not the right message to be going with. So I don't buy that got to market and it got launch ready without people flagging that. And the fact that it wasn't changed means that it was put out there to provoke.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously important to say that a lot of campaigns that are going out these days are specifically designed not really to be great campaigns, but to generate talkability and to get people to mention it and talk about it. But, you know, obviously that involves an element of being provocative, and obviously through things like creative testing and research and stuff like that, it can give you a view of, well, just how provocative can I be without it forcing a really strenuous backlash like we saw here. So we also, we are a research agency after all, so one of our webinars wouldn't be complete without a bar chart here and there. So here's a bar chart of some completely made up research with irrelevant numbers on them. But the barriers to creative testing are very much real. So not only am I in research, obviously, and I've come across these several times, but, you know, also worked in the advertising industry for over 10 years, which gives me plenty of experience of these kind of feedback pieces that you get and what gets in the way. So if you are in the camp that applies to the first, the second, or the fifth points on this bar chart, so that's it costs too much, it takes too long, and what worked before is bound to work now, then we can absolutely help you in your approach here. Now, if you're covered by points 3 and 4, then I'm sorry to say there's probably not much hope for you going forwards. I mean, Jimmy, what's your experiences with those two options?
Well, to be honest with you, only really point 3 is viable. Point 4, the one about sullying the trade with a witchcraft. Every creative, the fact that the work off brief is based on data in some way, so research and insight and feedback and stuff. So the 4th point is a non-point really, but the 3rd point is a very valid point, and I know that through bitter experience of working on campaigns and creative, and creative always have this at the back of their heads: what if I don't like the answers? But I think once creatives and good, strong creatives start to realise and understand that that isn't the real question. There's that's just hiding the question that's standing behind it, which is, what if they say they don't like it and I don't have time to do something else? That's the bottom line. It's not what if I don't like the answers. It's easily negated if creative is brought into the process. Any good creative, even working out a single-minded proposition, a single-minded proposition can have 2 or 3 different creative vehicles to take forward. And 9 times out of 10, it will be based on the creative or the creative team's gut feel to what's the best one to take forward and develop. At that point in time, creative testing can actually help you. You know, we took one forward, but we introduced creative early in the process with Echo that allowed us to retract and pivot slightly to make sure that we were landing exactly the right sentiment in the campaign. What if I don't like the answers? Isn't it? It's you know, what if I don't like the answers so far down the line and I haven't got time to react and do anything else? You know, and then we're going to market with something that we know isn't right. You know, they would rather not know or not ask the question so they can hide behind it.
Yeah. So I mean, I think when it comes to the to that, certainly the 3 points of view I mentioned around the cost and the timings and what's worked before, I can totally understand those 3 points of view. Certainly, I've spent many years doing traditional creative concept testing, evaluation, and A/B testing. So let's just chat through some of those perceived problems then. So it costs too much. The traditional method of creative testing is either by way of a survey to customers or prospective customers, to run focus groups, or indeed do a hybrid of both. And as we, you know, anybody that's in the room here can probably understand it, can easily run into a 5-figure sum, you know, for every single campaign that you do, which is something that just simply not every brand can afford to do. But over and above that, it takes too long, is obviously feedback that we get, and that the approach I mentioned previously there, and it can and does regularly take 6 to 8 weeks or more to process a creative test like that from start to finish. And when we consider that most tests aren't actually initiated until campaign budgets are approved and media schedules are purchased, it's simply far too tight a turnaround for you to be able to do anything about it. So, you know, obviously those are pretty real issues for some creatives and marketing teams. But, you know, also when we look at what worked before is bound to work now, we all love a copy and paste job from time to time, right? Well, you know, in the research and creative processes, we can't afford to rest on our laurels in such a way. You know, the world is in a constant state of flux, and what was acceptable just a few years ago can be a huge no-no now. So if you think things like the Snickers adverts with Mr. T or Yorkie adverts or anything along those lines, that gives you an idea of how, simply put, culture has changed to such an extent in such a short space of time that a complete rethink has required. But, you know, even if those messages are still an acceptable message in the current climate, wouldn't you rather it be, for example, 10% more effective than what you have done previously, and therefore better for business? So, I mean, you ask yourselves, what impact would a 10% increase in ad recall, sentiment, and propensity to purchase have on your business for a particular campaign? And if you answer that in the way that I expect you will, then obviously this becomes a no-brainer when you're looking at it. But, you know, Jimmy, some of the other reasons. So what if I don't like the answers? I don't believe in this. Research dilutes the creative process, etc., are obviously much harder for me to answer as a non-creative person. But I'll let you shed some light on that one.
Yeah, any focus group, any kind of creative testing and research is a scary experience for creatives and for creative teams, because they have become wedded to ideas, to approaches, to their concept thinking. If you ever want to flatten your self-esteem as a creative, the best thing you can ever do is sit in on a creative testing focus group. and because this thing that you absolutely love, you hear people kicking lumps out of it in a room and saying, no, I don't like this, that's rubbish, this and that. And, you know, I'll never forget the very first 2 that I ever sat in, both on the same night, the same campaign. And I sat in the first one, and this is going back 20 years, and we were all high-fiving each other before it, thinking, yeah, this is going to be great. And after the first focus group, It was, we were all on the floor. We thought, oh my God, we've hit rock bottom here. This is shocking. We went into the second group and then we realised that rock bottom had a basement level as well, and that we hadn't actually hit rock bottom yet. But the biggest thing that creators have to get over is learning to embrace it, because ultimately it does make the process better. It makes the campaign better. It makes everything. It increases the chances of success for all of the campaigns, but it also helps in terms of the creative. It helps you climb inside the minds, because even just now, most of the people on this call will have some kind of marketing or advertising background, and there are certain things and biases that you will take for granted just based on your knowledge, things that you will gloss over and presume that everyone will get this, and it might be the tiniest little bit of detail that can have a big impact. And only when you do creative testing with people who don't have their backgrounds do you then start to realize, actually, that which we thought was a really obvious thing isn't coming across that way. We need to tweak it. It can be word choice, it can be language, it can be anything. But these little things make a massive difference. And the other thing that the creative testing does is it shines a spotlight on the creative in a way that doesn't normally happen. It makes the creative wholly accountable. It's okay for creatives to hide behind an overall post-campaign analysis because it's part of the full mix. So the creative gets looked at, but everything else gets looked at. The reach, the brand recall before the campaign analysis, and all these other things. When you're doing creative testing, there is nothing. You're standing there solely on your own in the spotlight, and it's a scary place for a lot of creatives, but it's the best experience once you learn to embrace it.
Yeah. Brilliant. So now obviously you've mentioned that in terms of the reasons to not scrimp on your creative, I think is the best way to put it. What would you say are the main reasons to spend time and money on great creative?
Well, there's 4 on the screen there. I mean, the first one's an obvious one. I mean, how many times do you walk out supermarkets and you think, yeah, okay, I'm going to pick up that, oh God, what was it again? I can't remember the name of that. Bottle of wine that I saw advertised, I read about it, saw it on Facebook or something, whatever it might be. If you can't remember it, you can't buy it. It's as simple as that. And when you look at the amount of ads that people are subjected to on a single day, 6,000 to 10,000 ads in a single day. Some of them are blips, some of them are really overt ads, some of them are completely covert ads, some of them are simple signage with sales messages, but your brain is distilling and deciphering 6,000 to 10,000 of these a day. You need to stand out. One of the biggest reasons is because of the ROI. Nielsen research shows that 50% of your return is coming through your creative and your creative standout. That's more than reach, more than brand, more than targeting, more than recency and context and everything else. You think about the amount of time and effort that goes into researching and analysing the last parts that are actually collectively making up 50%, the other huge 50% of it. Very rarely gets anything like the kind of attention that it needs to get from the perspective this is generating half of the return. And everyone can remember the best ads and their favourite ads, and that can be going back to their childhood, or it can be as recently as the last few weeks and months. You will remember ads that stood out to you, and 9 times out of 10 these campaigns aren't live anymore. These channels aren't live anymore. That great London Underground ad that you saw isn't there anymore, but you still remember the ad, and they live long after the channels have disappeared.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And obviously we can see it's the same benefits in terms of research and testing. We've seen obviously there how you should invest in great creative. Now, obviously, just as vitally, you should research and test those creative ideas. So creative research guides your communication with current and potential customers. And once you have your research results, you should have enough ammunition to formulate the most effective way to communicate with those customers. So you should know what they like, what they don't like, what they hear, what they see, what they do. And then you can tailor what you say to them to take it. So you can tailor what you say to them to make them take action. And research can help you minimize risks as well. So through this kind of research, you may find all the information you need to decide whether to take action on a particular subject. So for example, you might find that the particular location where you wanted to open a shop already has a saturated market in your line of business, which should make you refrain from making the decision and look for a more appropriate spot. That's less about creative testing, of course, but simplistically, it's a good way to explain it. And research can help you determine or fine-tune your single-minded proposition. So every brand needs to make a promise. And if you think of the most known brands, they all make a promise to you, and you usually know what that promise is just by looking at their logo. So it could be it could be a fast and tasty meal, or the assurance of top technology. It needs to be simple, and research can help you define what your brand's promise is. And market research measures your reputation as well. It can help protect it. It can help improve it. So it's always good to know how you measure against that. And market research finds out just where you are, and then according to the results, you can take action to change that potential shift in perception that might come from a poorly executed or a brilliantly executed advertising campaign. So we've seen that creative research and testing, whilst great, has a lot of perceived barriers to entry. So it's most notably around time and cost. But, as you guys may be aware, with Rare Metrics, these barriers are pretty easy to overcome. So Rare Metrics is a quick and efficient way to understand what your customers or prospects think about your creative work by delivering data and feedback directly from your target audience. So whether your creative is at storyboarding phase, developed, or final creative, for a price as low as £375, you can get quick, high quality and robust data that's targeted to your needs, with results back in hours rather than weeks. So do you need 100 sample or 1,000 sample? It's no problem. National or regional sampling, again, there's no issue there. You can also select your audiences based on standard demographics, as well as being further hyper-targeted if required, with the addition of custom screening questions. So it means that it doesn't matter how far down the line your campaign development is. The self-service, easy-to-use tool can be deployed by creatives, marketing professionals, media buyers, or researchers, allowing the information and feedback you need to ensure it hits the mark. But vitally also giving you additional time to make any amends or tweaks as may be required. So the industry standard creative testing survey is already written for you. You just need to think about what you're going to do with the results and whether or not you'd like to add any custom questions into the mix. And although it's a self-service tool, as I've mentioned, it has the additional benefit of being owned and managed by a market research agency with plenty of experience in creative testing and research in general. So a quick email is all it takes to have a discussion with either myself or one of our great team members to walk you through the results, offer potential recommendations, and find the hidden meaning within the data. And if anyone on the webinar today would like to try Rare Metrics for the first time, please just drop us a line. We'll send you details in a follow-up email, of course, and we'll give you £100 free credit towards your first study, alongside a no-obligation demo, an overview of the service for you to decide for yourself what you think of it. And of course, obviously, a huge thanks to Jimmy at Mindfield Advertising for joining us today. And Jimmy and the team at Mindfield would love the opportunity to talk you through your creative, your approach, and even help you craft a single-minded proposition. So if you'd like to be introduced to Jimmy and his team for an audit of your creative and an informal chat about improving your creative output, again, just get in touch with us and I'll introduce you guys directly. So just finish up in a wee second, and I'll run over just a little bit because we're having a bit of fun as we're going through it. But, this is a quote from a famous American poet, writer, critic, and satirist in the 20th century, and it's so true. Creativity is a wild mind and a disciplined eye. So nothing can take away from the vital role a good creative strategist has to play in the success or failure of a business or service. And without the mind of these guys, the world would be a very boring place. But by giving them a fuller and rich understanding of your customers, your prospects, and the wider world at large, we can ensure that research-driven creativity can take your marketing strategy to the next level. So thanks very much for joining us. I'll pass you back to Hannah. We've got about 10 minutes for a Q&A session. If there's any questions that have been submitted, we'd be happy to answer them.
Cool, thanks guys. Thanks for taking us through that. And yeah, we've had a few questions come through. So if you do have any more, please just pop them in the Q&A box, which you can find on your toolbar at the bottom of the screen. So one of them says, I've done research in the past. Can't I just use the findings of that and apply it to the campaigns I'm working on now? So what's your thoughts on using research that you've already done previously and applying it to the campaign, a new campaign that you're working on?
Probably I can answer that one. I think, you know, ultimately when you are doing research for your customers or your prospects or anything like that, it's a slow and steady build up of intelligence and information that you have over time. So absolutely any previous research that you have done may be relevant to helping you make decisions and everything else. However, when you start to look at things on a campaign by campaign basis, I've obviously already highlighted when I was in the webinar there how quickly things can change. That can be something from culturally things can change, what's acceptable, what's not, for example. The advertising media in which people use can change over time. Obviously, this, I'm presuming it's relatively recent research as opposed to very old research. But also to the same extent, over and above that, you can have new competitors coming on the market that are being disruptive and causing issues that you may or may not have previously factored in. It could be that one of your other competitors has also embarked upon a heavyweight campaign and has managed to eat into some of your awareness as well as part of that. So, you know, I think the question around it is, do you need to do research for anything and everything that you do from a business perspective? No, of course you don't. Should you do it? And, you know, is it something that can have a potential benefit to you? Then yeah, you can. And I think it probably also harks back to what I was mentioning there about the fact that it worked before, so it's obviously going to work now. And if you can, let's say for example, you spend £375 testing some creative, and it allows you to be that campaign to be 3, 4, 5% more effective than it was previously, depending on the business you're in, what impact can that have on your bottom line in terms of sales if it's a campaign, or what impact can that have on your advertising recall? So there's a number of reasons why the recency effect in market research is incredibly important.
I think as well, to keep it in the context of the creative testing that we've been discussing this morning, if it is creative that you're thinking about, you know, we've done some testing in the past and we've got this feedback based on this style of ad or this look of ad or this feel, or we've only made a couple of small changes to this kind of ad and stuff. Remember, it's the small changes that can make a massive difference as well. There are so many different elements that go in to the creative that actually has a big difference on how it's landing with the intended audience as well, and what the response levels might be. And that can be anything from subtle changes in colour and palette and tone when it comes to word choice and language and copy. There's so many little things there, and it's the small things that make the big difference. So when you look at the cost of just running some early stage creative testing compared to the overall cost of a lot of marketing campaigns, it's really negligible, but the insights and the confidence that it can give you going forward can be, you know, pretty huge in terms of how the campaign performs overall.
Yeah, no, I mean, even just what you were saying with your case study as well, that one thing that lady said completely changed the whole messaging for you guys. And I think
Hannah, it's really easy to show or hear some TV campaigns that we've done, and these look really slick and well produced, and film-like qualities and all these other things. But I wanted to show an example where it was actually a little bit more, it wasn't painful, it was insightful, but it actually caused a little bit more disruption into the process, because we realised actually we can still follow the train of thought that we're going down, but we need to change the messaging around this, because you know it is landing like guilt tripping, and that's negative sentiment. We didn't want that, so we had to change it, and but because we'd introduced it early enough into the process, we were able to do that and launch with a campaign that actually ticked all the boxes and landed much better.
Yeah, definitely. Just kind of on that, there's a question that's come through, says, at like what point in the creative process do you bring testing in to help inform your ideas? And does testing help shape the SMP as well?
The creative testing shouldn't shape the SMP, that should come first. Your single-minded proposition is yours as a brand and a business. It shouldn't be affected by the creative. The creative is educated, that stems from your single-minded proposition. It's the other way around is the you know, the cat leading the horse, and it shouldn't be that way. When it comes to the creative testing, as I mentioned earlier on, you will always have good creatives will be developing 2 or 3 different vehicles, creative routes to take forward from the single-minded proposition. There will always be 2 or 3 different ways in which you can say, okay, yeah, we can go down this road, we can take it this way. What if we did a campaign that looked felt and sounded like this. That's the best point to do it, because it doesn't cost a lot of money to work up 3 early stage examples to explain, write some rationale around it about what you're trying to achieve from it, what's the single-minded proposition that's driving these 3 different routes, and then you can put that out and start to get some of the feedback from it. And what the great thing about that process as well is, quite often what can happen then is when you start to get the feedback on from the tests, and people start saying, yeah, I like this for this reason, I like this for that reason. It's never, yeah, that's the root of that. So that quite often it can be a bit of a pick and mix. We like this from this and we like this from that. And it then starts to shape, and what you move forward with is something that you know is actually, it's hitting the sweet spot, it's landing where it's supposed to be landing, but it allows you to take it forward with confidence. And actually, once the creators get into the habit of doing it that way, they go forward with much more confidence, rather than having that other creative treatment that they ruled out themselves at the back of their mind. But I really like that copy line from that treatment, and I'm starting to bleed some of it into this just now, and all that. It cuts all that out, and everyone moves forward in a simple, clear, single-minded direction. So for me, as early as possible, because it's when you're formulating ideas, work them up quickly. Doesn't have to be finished example, doesn't have to be a launch-ready state, but get some of the early testing done, and then it'll help you focus the mind much quicker and much clearer.
Perfect, great. Just one very last quick question. What are the best metrics for measuring creative impact?
I think from my perspective, Jimmy might also want to chip in on this, but I think from my perspective, the metrics that are probably the best for looking at assessing creative impact depend on the objective of your campaign. Some campaign objectives are very much around sales and have very much direct messaging stuff. Other campaigns are around branding and effectiveness, and then obviously if you're looking at a branding and effectiveness campaign, you want to know, is your creative memorable? Does it stick in the mind? Does it increase your sentiment of that brand? And therefore, when it finally comes time for you to need to interact with that brand, it might in many cases be 3, 6, 9 months down the line, or even longer in certain circumstances, and you think, what's the name of that? What's the name of that gas company I'm getting a new boiler from? I remember, right, I'll go and Google them and go with it. I think when it comes to direct sales messaging, of course, the metric on that is different. You want to measure things like propensity to purchase. What would you do with it? Would you tell other people about it? What actions will you take? Will you go on the website? Will you go into the store? With the end result of knowing ultimately, will you go and make a purchase with this company? And I think, those metrics obviously are quite different depending on the campaigns that they have. And it's not necessarily always just about what you do that's important from a metrics perspective. At the same time as testing your own creative, perhaps you should be considering testing the creative of your competitors as well. So these guys have got a march on us. They're 5-10% ahead of us in market share, for example. What is it about their creative that's giving them an edge? Obviously, you should always go down the route that you want to go down. But is there any elements of their execution, what they're saying, how they're doing it, that is the underlying reason for their success? And I think so ultimately there's a number of different metrics, but it entirely depends on what you're trying to achieve as part of that campaign. I don't know if you agree with that, Jimmy.
Yeah, I mean, your first point around what is it that we're selling? Is it for some, is it a considered purchase that can be once per year, once every few years? Is it an impulse buy? If it's an impulse buy, I'm more leaning towards looking at the reactive responses, i.e. sales, user numbers, different things like that, traffic on websites and stuff. If you take it from the standpoint that one of the key things we're always trying to build in the creative is memorability, what you're really looking for then is things like unprompted brand recall. So you need to have a good understanding of what was your unprompted brand recall before the campaign, what is it after the campaign, if you then work the numbers back and say, okay, well, we saw a 6-point increase, in that, and 50% of your increase is going to be your creative. You know that's shifted the needle 3 points for you, that creative and stuff. So there is ways that you can bring it back on a much more emotional level. I always look at the unprompted brand recall, things like the sentiment, and again, as Keith had mentioned, the propensity to purchase. because it gives you an idea of the throw forward sentiment that they've got towards the brand. And if the throw forward sentiment is good, it means that your immediate memorability is good, because people still have that emotional connection that they are drawn from when they're saying that they may be willing to buy from you, or they may be willing to use your service, or, you know, when it comes to it in 2 or 3 months' time, when I'm considering renewing my phone contract, going on holiday, changing my car, whatever it may be, I would consider, you know, Acme, whatever, then that's a good measure.
Okay, great. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much to both of you for your time, and for everyone for joining the webinar as well. If you did want to find out any more information about Rare Metrics or Mindfield advertising, please just drop us an email. And yeah, thanks for joining.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.